Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here today. This is my 8th stop on my speaking tour in Australia, and I've been having the best time meeting lovely people in this beautiful country, my first trip to Australia. But when I saw my itinerary, the town of Mullumbimby, I've been waiting to get here because I just love that name, Mullumbimby. So it's great to be here, and it's a beautiful town. I love seeing all the locally owned stores and restaurants on my way into town. And I was just thinking about the first time I walked down the street where my restaurant, the White Dog Cafe, is today, was in 1972. And I was immediately enchanted by this lovely little tree-lined street with a few locally owned businesses on the first floor of these exquisite Victorian brownstone row houses. The area around my street was being redeveloped by the University of Pennsylvania, and a lot of the old buildings were being torn down, and they were building these high-rise dormitories and strip malls and parking garages. So Sansom Street was this little oasis in the middle of all this. The houses there were over 100 years old, with these quaint little businesses on the first floor, human scale and inviting and homey. I moved into my house there at 3420 Sansom Street, and only a few days later found out that this block was going to be torn down, the whole thing torn down to make way for a shopping mall. And I just was aghast that these lovely brownstone houses and the small businesses would be destroyed in order to make way for fast food restaurants and chain stores. So I was 25 years old, and I was outraged by this and joined the local community group that was fighting the demolition of the houses, and ended up at one point lying down in front of the bulldozers when they came up the back alley to tear down the houses behind me. That was my first act of civil disobedience, and I didn't know at that time, but become my life's work really to protect small businesses and communities from the onslaught of corporate globalization and the chain stores and the big box stores that it brings to communities. So at the time that we were fighting the demolition on Sansom Street, I heard about the urban activist Jane Jacobs, who wrote Death and Life in Great American Cities, who was fighting a highway going through New York City. She lived in Greenwich Village above a candy shop there and became an activist. She challenged the prevailing ideas about urban renewal and planning in the 50s and 60s that was tearing down and destroying all these local communities and segregating people, separating the retail from the residential. There was a time when people could get to work or get to school, to leisure activities, just by walking, walkable communities, and that's what she supported. What's called mixed use, where retail and residential is all mixed together to these exciting and vibrant communities. During that time in the 50s and 60s in the United States, so much was going on to change the way that communities were developed. The move to the suburbs that made people dependent on cars. So the walkable communities were destroyed, and at the same time, much was going on in the rural areas where it had been that farmers had diversified farms. They grew many different types of fruits and vegetables and had a barnyard that was a lively mixture of cows and pigs and sheep and so on. They produced food for the local community. And then what happened is the big corporations came in and started buying up all the small farms and planting thousands of acres in one monocrop for exports, so that people lost their contact with the land and with where their food comes from. And the people lost their sense of place and their connection with each other and with the earth. We started this organization, and we need to be a leader in this. And how do you actually build a local living economy? Where do you start? So what I did is I figured, okay, well, what are the elements of a local living economy? Well, there's the basic needs of food, shelter, clothing, and energy. So, okay, where's the sustainable ag people in my community? Where are the green building people in my community? Where are the renewable energy people in my community? Where are the local fiber and sustainable local dressmakers and so on? Where are the recycling people? Where are the community capital people and so on? So that I identified the businesses, in each of the key areas. Obviously, you would be in the food, sustainable ag, what we call them the building blocks of a local living economy. So first, I identified the existing businesses that were in each of the primary areas that we need to build a local living economy. and then recruited people from each of those areas to be on our board of directors, so that at the table we had someone that had experience and expertise and vision, in their own area. And what we find in the United States, that there's an incredible movement around green building, there's an incredible movement around renewable energy, and there's an incredible movement around food, but they hadn't been talking to each other. That the sustainable food people weren't buying renewable energy, and the renewable energy people were investing in the stock market instead of locally, and so on. That what we needed to do was to connect the dots between all these wonderful movements into a holistic vision of what we wanted our community to look like.
Community, for example, in Byron Bay, let's say it was Woolworths. What do you feel is the best strategy to actually remove energy? Because obviously there's a large amount of people that come into Byron Shire because we have a large tourist population, and a lot of the dollars kind of go in and go straight out. And so is it a type of naming and shaming, or is it with local government creating some form of tax, or is it just purely education where we open more farmers markets and eventually devalue?
Right. We at BALLE, we tend not to attack or be about what we're against, but rather what we're for. So, I think, when a community is threatened by a big box store or whatever, the best thing is to create an alternative, to create an R-Mart, or an R-Box, or a community worth, or whatever, to create an alternative. So if there's a need in the community for a certain service or product, that should be fulfilled. So, the idea is to maybe help a local entrepreneur to expand his or her business, and somehow create an alternative to the chain store. And there's been situations, I'm sure this is true in Australia, where a chain store has come in and they failed. And no one goes there because the community doesn't really need it. So we try to educate, first of all, educate the consumers to buy local, but also if there's not a local, that's why we really need entrepreneurs, that's why we really need more young people to go into business, because we need to start businesses that our community needs. And that's one of the things that, another principle of our movement is that we're reinventing growth. That rather than a successful entrepreneur doing a cookie cutter model of their business and growing by starting businesses in someone else's community, that we look to see, well, what does my community need, to be self-reliant? One of our best examples of that in terms of the BALLE community is Zingerman's Deli. And Zingerman Deli in Michigan is a very popular, famous deli near the University of Michigan. And instead of doing a chain of delis, which they could have easily done, they looked to see what their community needed, and their community didn't have a bakery, so they started a bakery. Their community didn't have a dairy, with their own ice cream and yogurt and so on, so they started a dairy. So that's what we need entrepreneurs to do, to start what we need. And if we don't have a bakery or a dairy or a good grocery store, then a big box store is going to come in and fill that gap. So that's the most important thing, is to support entrepreneurship. I find that one of the challenges here is that so many good-willed citizens have a fear of business and a disdain for business. And so a lot of the nonprofits just think that all business is evil. But we're never going to get anywhere with that kind of attitude. That we have to realize that business can be beautiful, and that we have to support the growth of beautiful businesses in our community. And so that's what it's all about. It's about the positive energy of building an alternative, as opposed to protesting or picketing or any of that kind of thing. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you.